At the party, my sister-in-law's baby gender reveal, she proudly handed me the ultrasound and said, "Such a beautiful baby girl, isn't she? I'm a radiologist." The moment I looked at the image, my blood ran cold. I pulled my brother aside. "We need to talk. Right now." That was not a child. The backyard was full of excitement, the kind of joyful energy that comes with a big family celebration. String lights draped the trees, casting a soft golden glow over everyone. The music was light and fun, a playlist of classic pop songs playing in the background. A table stacked high with cupcakes and cookies, all pink and blue, stood at the center, surrounded by family and friends eagerly chatting and laughing. I tried to smile and join in, but all I could think about was the image in my hands. Sloane, my brother's wife, stood there waiting for me to react, practically glowing in that white sundress, her bump stretched tight across her belly. Her face was alight with excitement, that innocent kind of joy that only comes from expecting a child. She was thrilled. She was handing me the future, expecting validation. But I couldn't. I couldn't just smile and tell her what she wanted to hear. Not after seeing that ultrasound. Not after what I recognized in it. I could feel my pulse quicken as my thoughts scrambled. There was a faint shadow in the image, something off about the contours of the face. A lack of clarity that I had seen before. Many times before, in my consulting days at Keepsake Studios. The kind of thing that made my stomach drop. That was no baby. It was a lie. I handed the printout back to her, forcing a smile that felt as cold as the pit in my stomach. "It looks great," I said, barely managing the words. I handed it back and tried to slip away, but Sloane stopped me, reaching out with that expectant smile still painted on her face. "Isn't she just perfect?" she asked, her voice tinged with hope. I nodded quickly, looking away. "Yeah, perfect," I lied. But it didn't feel perfect. I felt the weight of the lie crushing me. The urgency to get out of there, before someone else handed me another image, or asked me to confirm what wasn't real. But there was no escape. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I looked around, my eyes falling on my brother, Knox, standing a few feet away, beer in hand, laughing with a group of people. He was the kind of guy who didn't take things seriously, who lived in the moment, and kept the family afloat with his charm and wit. But right then, all I could think about was how to get him alone. I walked over, pulling him aside before anyone could notice I was slipping away. "We need to talk," I said quietly, keeping my voice low, trying not to make a scene. He raised an eyebrow, half smiling, like I was joking. "Everything okay?" he asked, a little too casually, the kind of question you ask when you think nothing's wrong. I closed the door behind us, trapping us in the quiet of the laundry room. I could hear the muffled countdown from outside. People chanting, waiting for the balloon to pop. "This isn't a baby, Knox," I said, my voice firm despite the knot in my stomach. "Whatever she's carrying, it's not a princess. It's not even a pregnancy." Knox laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was sharp and dismissive, like he didn't believe a word I was saying. "Here we go again," he muttered, rolling his eyes. "Lenora the perfectionist strikes. Sloane's finally happy, and you can't stand it." I felt the sting of his words, but I didn't back down. "I'm telling you," I pressed, "this isn't right. The ultrasound's fake. I've seen it before. This is stock footage, Knox. It's all staged. He stepped back, disbelief spreading across his face. He wasn't taking me seriously, and that was the problem. I wasn't some paranoid skeptic. I was a professional. I'd seen hundreds of ultrasounds, thousands of images, and I knew when something wasn't real. But he was already moving toward the door, ready to get back to the party. "You're embarrassing yourself," he said. "You're upsetting Sloane." He opened the door, just enough to hear the countdown echo through the house. I couldn't stand it anymore. The air felt too heavy, the pressure in my chest too tight. But what could I do? The party was out there. The balloon was about to pop. I was about to shatter everything. "Fine," I said, quietly, my voice low but firm. "Let's go back out there, Em." I walked past him, already feeling the distance growing, knowing that no one would listen to me. That the truth would stay buried, hidden beneath the weight of their celebrations. But something inside me snapped. I had to speak, even if it meant losing them all. I followed Knox back into the sunlight, the weight of the situation hanging between us, unspoken but undeniable. The air was thick with the sounds of the party, laughter, the pop of a champagne cork, the soft hum of a DJ's playlist in the background. The kind of celebration that should feel light and fun, but for me, it had become suffocating. Sloane was waiting by the table, a wide grin on her face, as she talked to a couple of friends, her hand resting gently on her belly. She looked radiant, and for a moment, I almost wished I could join her in her happiness. But I knew I couldn't. Not when I was holding onto a truth they didn't want to hear. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, the colorful decorations, the scent of sweet treats in the air, the sound of people talking and laughing, oblivious to the dark cloud hanging over me. I couldn't just stand there and pretend anymore. It felt like my body was betraying me, fighting against the lie I had to let unfold. But there was nothing I could do. The moment I stepped back out there, everything would shift. I'd be the bad guy. I'd ruin the party. "Lenora." Sloane called, her voice light and bright. She was already looking at me, her eyes full of hope. She didn't know. She couldn't know what I knew. I forced a smile, stepping toward her. "Hey, everything okay?" she asked, reaching out to take my hand. There was no way to explain it. No way to put into words the weight of what I had to carry, not without tearing everything apart. "Perfect," I lied again, squeezing her hand as gently as I could, trying to mask the tension in my chest. Knox moved in beside us, wrapping his arm around Sloane's shoulders, pulling her close. He flashed me a quick look, one that told me everything I needed to know. The same look he always gave me when I was about to overstep, the one that told me to back off and keep quiet. "You okay, sis?" he asked, his voice light, but edged with something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was concern, or maybe it was just an automatic response, something he always said when he knew I was about to cause trouble. He could tell. Even if I didn't say anything, that something was off. I nodded, holding my ground. "Yeah, just tired," I muttered. But I couldn't keep the tightness in my throat from showing. Sloane laughed, squeezing my hand. "Come on, you're missing the fun. The countdown's about to start. We're all waiting for you." Her face lit up, and she spun toward the crowd, pulling me along behind her. The circle of friends and family gathered around the patio was a blur of excitement. The countdown was already starting, and people were clapping, cheering, getting ready for the big reveal. I followed her into the crowd, but every step felt heavier. The more I tried to smile, the more it felt like I was wearing someone else's face. Everyone was so caught up in their joy, and here I was, the only one seeing things for what they really were. My gaze drifted to the giant balloon, hanging in the middle of the yard, the thing that would burst and turn the entire party into a spectacle of pink or blue confetti. They had all decided it was a girl, they were so sure. But I wasn't sure anymore. I had seen the shadows in that image, the discrepancies, the unmistakable signs of manipulation. I could practically hear the faint hum of the ultrasound machine in my mind, as if it were still running, showing me the truth I didn't want to see. I forced myself to stand still, as everyone else crowded around, faces beaming, waiting for the big moment. The air felt thick with expectation, and my heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. 10. The countdown began, and the crowd joined in, their voices rising in unison, growing louder with each number. 9, 8, 7. Sloane's hand tightened around mine, and I could feel her pulse under her skin, racing with the anticipation. She squeezed harder, her eyes never leaving the balloon. She was so certain of what was coming. 6, 5, 4. Knox wrapped his arm around her, his body shielding her from the rest of us, pulling her closer to him. I watched him, watched the way he smiled at her, the way he shared this moment with her, and a part of me wanted to join them. But I couldn't. 3, 2. My breath hitched. I closed my eyes for half a second, praying I was wrong, praying the picture I had seen wasn't true. But deep down I knew. 1. The balloon burst with a loud pop, and the confetti exploded in a wave of pink, swirling through the air, sticking to skin and hair, floating down like a dream come true. The crowd screamed with joy, hands raised, people laughing and hugging. Sloane spun in a circle, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears already streaming down her cheeks. Knox lifted her off the ground, laughing as the confetti covered them both. I could hear my mother's voice, breaking through the noise, a high-pitched laugh of disbelief, the kind of sound you make when you finally get what you want. "My granddaughter," she cried, rushing to embrace them both. I stood there, frozen. My phone was still in my hand, recording the moment on autopilot, but I wasn't present. My body moved, but my mind was somewhere else, somewhere cold and distant. I wasn't part of this moment. Not really. The rest of the world celebrated around me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. The one who knew the truth and had to pretend like everything was perfect. Because nothing about this was perfect. Nothing at all. The rest of the party continued around me, but I stood still, my mind racing. The pink confetti stuck to my skin, clinging to my dress, as I pretended to smile and clap along with everyone else. I forced myself to look at Sloane, who was still spinning in circles, laughing, her hands pressed to her mouth, as though she couldn't believe it. And maybe she couldn't. She'd waited for this moment, dreamed of it for years. I could see the tears in her eyes, and they weren't tears of doubt. They were tears of joy, of relief, of everything she had longed for coming true. She didn't know what I knew. She couldn't. But I knew. I knew there was no baby. There was no little girl. The ultrasound was fake, The heartbeat was fabricated. It was all a lie. I forced myself to look at Knox, who stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her like he was shielding her from the rest of the world. He met my gaze across the crowd, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Disbelief, but it wasn't for the same reasons I felt it. He didn't see the lie. He saw me as the problem. I knew that look. It was the same one he had always given me when I tried to challenge anything he said or did. The look of dismissal, like I was overthinking everything, making mountains out of molehills. Perfect, right? Sloane's voice broke through my thoughts, pulling me back to reality. She had stopped spinning and was standing in front of me now, her hands resting on her belly, the pink confetti sticking to her dress and hair like some sort of fairy tale moment. Lenora, you're going to be the coolest aunt. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to be excited for her, to share in her joy, but it was all I could do to keep the tears from falling. How could I be the coolest aunt when I knew what was really happening? How could I look at her and smile, knowing she was about to be crushed by the truth? I squeezed her hand, forcing a smile. Of course, I said, my voice feeling foreign to me. You're going to be an amazing mom. Sloane beamed, and for a moment, it almost felt real. Almost. The party continued around us, people celebrating and laughing, but it was all noise to me now. I was standing in the center of it, but I wasn't really there. My mind was elsewhere, replaying the ultrasound over and over, analyzing the details, the shadows, the distorted image that I knew wasn't real. The whole thing felt like some sick joke. How could everyone else be so blind to it? How could they ignore what was so obvious to me? Let's get a picture. Mom's voice cut through my thoughts, and I turned to see her beaming, holding out her phone as she approached. She wrapped an arm around Sloane, pulling her close. The camera clicked, capturing the moment, the perfect family photo. Everyone was laughing, smiling, soaking in the celebration. I stood there, holding my phone up, still recording like I had been all afternoon. But this time it felt different. I wasn't part of the picture. I wasn't in that moment. I was on the outside looking in, the only one who knew the truth. My hands shook as I tried to focus the camera, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't keep the mask up any longer. I couldn't pretend like everything was fine. Sloane's friends gathered around, laughing and talking, and I felt the pressure of the moment building. I had to get out of here. I couldn't be a part of this. I couldn't stay and watch them all celebrate something I knew wasn't real. But before I could make an excuse, Knox was there, his hand on my shoulder, pulling me gently away from the group. You okay? He asked, his voice low. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. There was too much building inside me, too much anger, frustration, and guilt. I need to talk to you, I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Knox glanced back at Sloane, who was still surrounded by her friends, then looked at me with that familiar look of impatience. Come on, Lenora, what now? It's a party. Can't you just? I need you to listen, I interrupted, my voice stronger this time. We need to talk. In private. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't have time for this right now. Everything's fine. You're just making it worse. His words hit me like a slap, and I felt the cold burn of frustration flare in my chest. I'm not making it worse, Knox. I'm trying to save you from making a huge mistake. He stared at me, confusion flickering in his eyes. What the hell are you talking about? I opened my mouth to explain, but the words stuck in my throat. There was no easy way to say this. There was no way to make him understand. Not here, not now. Forget it, I said, my voice shaky. It doesn't matter. It's already done. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, still staring after me, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just walk away. But in that moment, I was out of options. The party continued, and I kept my phone raised, still recording the laughter, the smiles, the joy. But all I could hear was the ticking of a clock. The countdown had already begun, and it wouldn't be long before the truth came crashing down. I barely spoke to anyone for the rest of the party. I watched the crowd around me, smiling, laughing, taking pictures, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The celebration continued as if everything was perfectly normal, but I was suffocating in the lie that no one else could see. My heart raced as the sound of the music and laughter bounced off the walls of the backyard, an eerie contrast to the storm inside me. At some point, I found myself standing alone near the table with the leftover snacks, staring down at a plate of half-eaten cupcakes. The frosting was smeared across the tops, sticky and sweet, like everything else that was supposed to be perfect. I didn't even taste them as I shoved one in my mouth. The sweetness was a bitter reminder that my family would never understand. I was trying to push the thoughts away when I heard a voice behind me. Lenora. I turned to see Sloane standing there, looking pale despite the festive surroundings. Her hand rested on her belly, and her expression was softer now, less radiant than it had been before. She was still smiling, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. I'm fine, I said before she could speak, trying to cover up my own discomfort. Just needed a minute. But she wasn't convinced. Are you sure? You've been acting so weird today. I swallowed hard, forcing another smile. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain to her what was really happening when I barely understood it myself? Yeah, just. I'm tired. Lots to take in. Her smile faded slightly and she stepped closer to me, her voice dropping a little. Lenora, what's going on? You were so upset earlier when we were in the other room. Is everything okay? I could feel the pressure building. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't tell her the truth. Not now, not here. It was too much. She was too excited. She wouldn't believe me anyway. I'm fine, Sloane. My voice cracked. I just don't want to ruin your day. She nodded, her expression softening. I know you're just being cautious. But you don't have to protect me, Lenora. I'm happy, and I want you to be happy for me too. Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. Of course, she was happy. Of course, she wanted to believe in the dream she had been sold. She had no reason to question the picture in front of her. But I knew the truth. I was the one left holding it. And it felt like a weight too heavy to bear. Just as I opened my mouth to say something else, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Knox. Everything okay? He asked again, his voice too casual for the situation. He had that familiar grin on his face, the one that usually put everyone at ease, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not this time. I'm fine, I said, forcing myself to sound convincing. Just need some air. Knox let out a soft chuckle. You always were the one who took things too seriously. He squeezed my shoulder, giving me a playful shove, before turning back toward the crowd. I stood there for a moment, watching him as he walked away, my thoughts spinning. I had never felt so alone in my own family. The party raged on around me, but I felt like an outsider in my own skin. It wasn't long before Sloane's discomfort started to show. At first, it was subtle, just a slight grimace as she rubbed her lower abdomen. But then it grew more noticeable. Her face paled, and she shifted her weight from foot to foot, like she was trying to find a comfortable position that didn't exist. I watched her for a moment, but it wasn't until she winced that I finally moved toward her. Sloane, I asked softly, touching her arm. Are you okay? She tried to laugh it off, but there was a tightness in her voice. I'm fine. Just too many cupcakes, I think. But I didn't buy it. The look on her face told me everything. Something wasn't right. Let's go to the hospital, just to be sure, I said, already moving to grab my keys from the table. She hesitated, glancing around at everyone, but then she nodded. Okay. Yeah, better safe than sorry, right? I could see Knox across the yard, talking to some of the guys, completely oblivious to what was happening. Sloane's discomfort had become harder to ignore, and I could feel my heart rate increase as I thought about what could be wrong. Knox, I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. He turned, raising an eyebrow. I'm taking Sloane to the hospital, I said. I think it's better to get checked out, just in case. He looked at her, then back at me, and for a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. She's fine. She's just probably overwhelmed with everything. I shook my head. I don't think so. There was a beat of silence, then he nodded, finally giving in. All right. Call me if you need anything. His words were light, but there was a hesitation there, like he wasn't really taking it seriously. I didn't argue. I turned and helped Sloane into the car, her body stiff with discomfort. Knox didn't follow. Staying behind to help his mom with the rest of the party, as if nothing were wrong. But I could feel the weight of what was happening. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off. As we drove, the silence between Sloane and me stretched out. She kept her eyes fixed on the window, her fingers lightly gripping the seat. Do you think it's really just too much sugar? She asked quietly, breaking the silence. I don't know, I replied. But I'd rather be sure. The familiar scent of antiseptic hit me as we pulled into the hospital parking lot. I swiped us through the staff entrance, bypassing triage. Sloane looked a little more at ease now that we were here, but I could tell she was still uneasy. Let's get you checked out, okay? I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But even I could hear the edge of concern creeping in. We were met by the charge nurse, Carla, who led us straight to an ultrasound room. Sloane lay back on the table, and I could hear the familiar whir of the machine. Carla applied the gel to Sloane's belly, and I stood by the door, watching as the image came up on the screen. What I saw made my stomach drop. It wasn't a baby. There was no pregnancy. There was just a large, complex mass, filling most of Sloane's left ovary. No gestational sac, no heartbeat. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. The truth I had been dreading was right there, staring back at me. The screen flashed with the stark, unforgiving image of Sloane's abdomen. What should have been a soft, round shape, a baby, a future, was nothing more than a dark, swirling mass. No heartbeat. No fetal pole. No nothing. Just an ominous blob, sitting heavy where life should have been. I felt the air leave my lungs, the shock freezing me in place. It was all I could do to steady myself as the reality of the moment hit like a wrecking ball. Sloane hadn't moved yet. She was still staring at the screen, waiting for the usual signs of life that came with every ultrasound I had ever read. But there was nothing here. I looked at Carla, the nurse, who seemed to know what was coming next before I did. Sloane's eyes flickered toward me, confused, hopeful, as if she expected me to say something to make it all right. "Where's our daughter?" she whispered, her voice quiet, almost afraid of what the answer might be. My throat tightened, my heart pounding. I turned back to the screen, trying to steady my hands. "There is no daughter, Knox," I said, my voice low, barely above a whisper. Sloane's head slowly turned, her eyes wide with confusion. She looked at me as though waiting for the image to change, as if she could will a fetus into existence by staring at it long enough. She didn't understand. She couldn't. She had been so sure. She had felt the kicks, the movement, the heartbeat that they had been told was there. The images she had seen, the videos of a perfect little girl, her future already mapped out. It was all a lie. Sloane turned back to the screen, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the truth in black and white. The shadows. The cystic mass. The absence of the things that should have been there. The tears began to fall, silent and slow. She didn't scream or shout. She simply stared at the screen, as if she could make it all disappear by willing it away. I took a step closer to the bed, but Knox was already moving. He stepped forward, eyes darting between the monitor and Sloane, his expression wild with disbelief. "Wait. What? There has to be a mistake. She's 22 weeks. We've seen the heartbeat. We have the videos." Carla's voice was gentle but firm. "The problem is, those images you have are not real, Knox. This isn't a baby." She paused, her tone shifting to something that almost sounded clinical. "What we're seeing here is a large, complex mass on Sloane's left ovary. It's been growing for some time, and it's pressing on everything around it, which is why she's been feeling the movements. Some of these masses can cause pregnancy hormones to show up in blood tests, which is why your tests came back positive for pregnancy." The words hung in the air like an unwanted truth that refused to be ignored. I watched Knox's face crumble, the panic and confusion spreading across his features. He leaned closer to the screen, his eyes desperately searching for something. Anything that could make this all make sense. But there was nothing there. Sloane's hand fell from her belly, the place where she had imagined her daughter. Growing inside her, now an empty space. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold herself together, but the dam had already broken. Her body began to shake, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I looked at Knox again, who was still staring at the screen, disbelief frozen on his face. His voice cracked as he spoke again. "This can't be right. It can't be. We paid extra for the 40D package. They let us record the heartbeat. I saw it. It was there." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the words I had to say. That heartbeat was probably a recording they play for every client. It's the same 30-second loop. The air in the room felt suffocating, the silence thick with unspoken words. Sloane turned her head slowly toward me, her expression one of pure devastation. The tears kept falling, slowly, silently. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a kind of quiet grief, like she couldn't quite comprehend what was happening. "Why would you do this to me?" she whispered, her voice small, broken. Her question hit me like a slap. I didn't know how to answer. I hadn't done anything to her. I had simply seen the truth. The studio had done this to her. They had preyed on her vulnerability, on her hope. And I had tried to warn her. But instead of comforting her, I had exposed the worst thing she could ever imagine. And for that, I knew I was about to lose her. Before I could respond, Dr. Elena Morales stepped into the room, her white coat crisp, and her hair pulled back into a messy bun. She walked over to the monitor, took one look at it, and understood everything without a word. "Lenora, you want to run this, or should I?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. I shook my head. "You do it. I'm family." Elena nodded and took the probe from Carla. The screen refreshed, showing a clearer image now. The mass was large, over 15 centimeters, with a mix of solid and cystic components. There was no fetus, no yolk sac, nothing resembling a pregnancy. "This is classic," Elena said softly, more to Sloane than to anyone else. "This is a complex ovarian mass, M. It's pressing on everything around it, which is why you felt movements. The good news, if there is any, is that most of these are benign. Dermoid cysts, endometriomas, cystinomas, there are many possibilities. But we won't know for sure until we can get a pathology report." Sloane's lips parted, but no sound came out. She didn't need to say anything. The shock had already set in. Knox, however, wasn't ready to give up. "No. This is a joke. There's no way. We've seen her. She's been moving. We've heard the heartbeat. This can't be happening." I looked at him, my voice soft but steady. "You're not going to hear anything now, Knox. There is no baby. This is what's inside her right now." I motioned to the screen, the cold reality of it all hitting me again. Sloane's face went completely blank, and she collapsed back against the bed, her body trembling with quiet sobs. Her hand fell limply at her side. No longer resting on the belly, that had been the center of her world for so long. "Why would they do this to us?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, as she turned her head away from the screen. I had no answer for her. I only knew one thing. This wasn't just about a fake pregnancy. It was about a system that had betrayed her. A system that had betrayed all of us. The hospital room felt sterile and cold as I watched Sloane, still lying motionless in the bed. The shock had dulled her expressions, and Knox had pulled a chair close, sitting by her side, rubbing her back in slow, comforting circles. His face was blank, the confusion evident in his eyes, but he was trying to hold it together for her. Just as she was trying to hold it together for him. But neither of them were succeeding. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching them. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense of something breaking that neither of them could quite articulate. My eyes shifted to the screen once more. The image still vivid in my mind. The ultrasound I'd seen. The thing that shouldn't have been there. The lies that had wrapped themselves around their joy like a snake tightening its grip. Sloane had been so sure. The movement, the fluttering, the excitement, she had felt it all. She had prepared herself for motherhood, decorated the nursery, gone through the motions with such an unwavering belief in what was to come. But now, all of it was shattered. The dreams of a daughter, a family, gone in an instant. "Can we talk?" I heard Knox's voice cut through the silence, his eyes meeting mine as he looked up from Sloane. I didn't respond immediately. I was still stuck in the overwhelming weight of everything. I wanted to tell him that he needed to wake up. That this wasn't just about Sloane's health. It was about the trust they had placed in a place that didn't deserve it. But all I could muster was a small nod. He stood up, brushing his hand across Sloane's cheek, gently before walking toward me. I felt a pang of guilt for not knowing how to comfort him. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was just lost. "I don't understand," he said softly, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking more to himself than to me. "How did this happen? How could we not know?" I sighed and pushed myself off the wall, crossing my arms tighter across my chest. "It's simple, really. They lied to you. All of this. The ultrasounds, the heartbeat videos, they're fake. It's a scam. It's a business built on false hope." Knox looked at me, as if I had just slapped him. "You're telling me that all those pictures, all those videos, everything she's been seeing is a lie?" I nodded, feeling the weight of the truth crushing me. "Yes. They use stock photos, doctored images. Anything they can get away with to make you believe it's real. These ultrasound boutiques, they aren't regulated. The technicians aren't required to have the right qualifications. They're just selling fantasies." His jaw clenched as he processed the information, trying to fit it into the reality that was collapsing around him. "But Sloane's been to appointments. She's seen the heartbeat. How can you just know that? How can you be so sure?" "I'm a radiologist," I said quietly, looking him in the eye. "I've seen hundreds of ultrasounds. I've seen the same fake overlays, the same poor Photoshop jobs. I've consulted for these boutique studios before. I know what I'm looking at." I watched as the disbelief melted into something else on his face. Hurt, betrayal. He ran a hand through his hair and turned away from me, pacing for a moment before stopping. "And you didn't tell us. You just let us keep going, keep celebrating." I felt the sting of his words, but I couldn't back down. I tried to tell you, but you didn't want to hear it. And Sloane, she wanted this so badly, Key Knox. I couldn't ruin it for her." His shoulders slumped, the weight of everything sinking in. He looked defeated, more broken than I'd ever seen him. "I don't know what to do now," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't know how to fix this." "I don't think you can fix this," I said softly, my own voice low, wary. "But you can make it right. You need to start by looking at the facts. Start by taking responsibility for what happened. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a scam." "I don't know what to say to Sloane," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "She's already been through so much. And now this. How do I tell her the truth when we've both been lied to?" I didn't have the answer for that. I didn't know how he could tell her. The truth would destroy her. It would destroy everything they had built up in their minds. But there was no other choice. "Sloane needs to hear it from you, Knox," I said quietly. She deserves the truth, even if it hurts. You can't keep pretending. Not after what we just saw on that screen. Knox didn't say anything right away. He just stood there, staring at the floor, the weight of his responsibilities settling on his shoulders like an anchor. I couldn't blame him for feeling overwhelmed. I felt it too. But this wasn't just about the lies the boutique had fed them. It was about the trust they had placed in something that never should have been trusted. And it was about the pain Sloane would carry for the rest of her life. I'll talk to her, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. But I don't know how to fix it. You don't need to fix it, I replied. You just need to be there for her. The words felt hollow even as I said them. There was no fixing this. No going back to the way things were before. The damage had been done, and the only thing left was to face the aftermath. As Knox walked back towards Sloane, I felt the weight of everything settle in my chest. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or just exhausted. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to tell the world what I knew, but none of that would change the truth. And right now, the truth was more than anyone could bear. I turned away from the room, walking out into the sterile hallway. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights, filling the silence around me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. It was over. The days that followed were a blur of legal papers, phone calls, and endless hours spent scurrying through documentation. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, about how it all went so wrong. The image of Sloane lying in that hospital bed, her face drained of color, haunted me at night. I could still hear the way her voice broke when she asked, "Why would you do this to me?" And Knox. He had been shocked, a man caught in the wake of a catastrophe that was far bigger than he could have imagined. I wasn't sure where he was in his head, but I knew he was still reeling. Still trying to make sense of a reality that had been turned upside down. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became to make sure that the same thing didn't happen to anyone else. Someone had to pay for what had happened. Someone had to answer for the pain they had caused. I started digging. It wasn't enough to just know that the ultrasound was fake. I needed to know who was behind it all, who had orchestrated this web of lies. It was only then that I began to understand just how deep the deception ran. Sweet Angel Ultrasound Studio wasn't just a small time fraud. It was a business built on exploiting the vulnerability of women like Sloane. Like every other hopeful mother who had walked through its doors. I knew this wasn't just a matter of a bad decision. This was a system of exploitation, of selling dreams that would never come true. The more I dug into Sweet Angel, the more I uncovered. Complaints from other clients. Lawsuits that had been filed but mysteriously dropped. The studio's owner, Melanie Parsons, was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. She had figured out how to exploit the system, how to take advantage of the emotional desperation of women who only wanted one thing, the chance to see their child. The worst part. I wasn't the only one who had been fooled. There were others, countless others, who had been lied to just like Sloane. All of them had been sold the same picture, the same false hope, for a price. I called an attorney, Daniel Pierce, who had experience handling cases against fraudulent businesses. When I told him what had happened, he didn't hesitate. "Send me everything you have," he said. "If it's as bad as you say, we'll bury them." It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. I started reaching out to other women who had been victims of Sweet Angel. One by one, they came forward, sharing their stories. A woman named Ashley from Pensacola had been told that she was carrying twins when she was actually carrying a single child, M. She had painted the nursery lavender, convinced she was having 2 girls. Another woman, Melanie, had been told she was having a healthy baby boy, only to later discover that she had been carrying an ectopic pregnancy that had gone unnoticed until it was too late. The stories poured in, each one more heartbreaking than the last. I kept a running list, kept the names and dates organized, tracking every single case of malpractice, every instance of deception. But even as the evidence grew, I knew it wasn't enough. This wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about making sure this never happened again. I had to go further, had to expose the people behind it all. I contacted the Alabama Department of Public Health and presented them with a massive file, detailing everything I had learned. The women who had been affected, the fake ultrasound images, the lack of regulation, everything. I didn't just want Sweet Angel shut down. I wanted the people responsible held accountable. Weeks passed, and the pressure mounted. I could feel the weight of everything, the toll it was taking on me. The phone calls came less frequently. My family had stopped checking in. My parents still sent texts, but they were brief, impersonal. Knox didn't return my calls, and Sloane, she was slipping further away, retreating into herself as the weight of the truth buried her under layers of grief. But there was still work to be done. One morning, I woke up to a call from Daniel Pierce. "The Department of Public Health is ready to take action," he said, his voice full of quiet satisfaction. "They've issued an emergency cease and desist order. They're raiding the studio Monday morning. They want you there when they serve it." I felt a surge of adrenaline. Finally, something was happening. Finally, someone was taking action. I arrived at Sweet Angel before dawn on Monday morning. The strip mall where the studio was located was quiet, the sun still low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I parked across the street, watching as unmarked white vans began to pull up, followed by a few officers in navy windbreakers. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stepped out of the car. The weight of everything I had learned, everything I had sacrificed, pressing down on me. Melanie Parsons arrived just as the officers were about to knock on the door. She was wearing a pink smock, her mascara already smudged from tears. She looked disoriented, frantic as she tried to shut the door when she saw the badges, but it was too late. The officers forced the door open, and within moments, they were inside, photographing documents and equipment, seizing hard drives, and sealing the premises. I stood across the street, my arms folded tightly across my chest, watching the scene unfold. The crowd of former clients began to gather, some with their phones raised, others just watching, waiting for the inevitable. Melanie's protests echoed through the air, her voice trembling with panic as she claimed that this was all harassment. "You can't do this to me. I'm a small business owner." She shouted. "This is persecution." But the officers weren't listening. They kept moving, methodically taking down evidence. while Melanie's cries grew more desperate. And then, just as the officers were finishing up, the crowd began to clap. It started with one person, and then another, until the applause spread, filling the air with the sound of vindication. Sweet Angel Ultrasound Studio was done. The scam was over. But as I stood there, watching it all unfold, I felt nothing but emptiness. This wasn't the victory I had imagined. It wasn't the redemption I had hoped for. This wasn't about winning a case. It was about the price I had paid to expose the truth. The world saw me as a hero. But in the quiet spaces, in the corners where the truth had settled, I knew I had lost more than I had ever bargained for. And I wasn't sure it was worth it. The court trial felt like an eternity, but in many ways, it was also the quietest time of my life. I'd spent so many sleepless nights collecting evidence, talking to victims, building a case so strong it felt almost impossible to ignore. But here I was, standing in front of a judge, watching as Sweet Angel Ultrasound Studios owner, Melanie Parsons, tried to maintain her composure, while the prosecutor detailed the crimes she had committed. She had tried to defend herself in the beginning. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding, a series of mistakes that had been blown out of proportion. But as the evidence piled up, the truth became undeniable. She had knowingly and deliberately deceived women for profit, taking advantage of their hopes and dreams to build her own business on a foundation of lies. I watched from the back of the courtroom, my arms crossed tightly, my heart heavy. This was what I had worked for, what I had fought for, but it didn't feel like a victory. Not really. The case moved quickly. The jury deliberated for just a few hours before returning with a verdict. Melanie Parsons was found guilty on all counts: practicing medicine without a license, wire fraud, mail fraud, deceptive trade practices, theft by deception. The list was long. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to the victims, millions of dollars, divided among the women who had been wronged. The applause in the courtroom was almost immediate. It came from the victims who had shown up to testify, the ones who had shared their stories, some of them still in tears, but all of them with a sense of relief that justice had finally been served. But I felt numb. I stood there as reporters swarmed Melanie, shouting questions, their cameras flashing. They weren't interested in me, of course. They were interested in the criminal. The woman who had deceived dozens, if not hundreds, of women. They were interested in the spectacle of it all. The headlines would be about her sentencing, about her betrayal of so many families. But what about the families who had been left behind? What about the people who would never be the same because of what had happened? I felt the weight of everything, of the truth that had cost me my relationship with my family, of the lives I had helped save, and yet, of the deep loneliness that was settling in. The victory felt like a hollow echo. As I walked out of the courtroom, I saw Melanie being escorted by officers, her head held low. She didn't even look up at the crowd of reporters shouting her name. She had nothing left. Not her business, not her freedom, not her dignity. It had all crumbled, just as it should. But there was no satisfaction in it for me. Not anymore. The next few weeks were a blur. The news outlets covered the case, calling it a win for justice. They plastered my name everywhere, calling me a hero. I was interviewed by local stations, asked to speak about the case, about what I had uncovered, about how I had exposed the fraud. I spoke about the victims, about the women who had trusted Sweet Angel with their hopes, and how they deserved better. But every time I spoke, I felt more disconnected. The more they called me a hero, the more I felt like an imposter. This wasn't the life I had imagined. It wasn't the victory I had hoped for. There was no family to share it with, no one to celebrate with. Just a hollow sense of duty that had taken me farther from the people I loved. I hadn't heard from Knox since the trial. He didn't show up at the courthouse, didn't call to check in after Melanie was sentenced. And Sloane, I had received a single text from her, just a simple, "I'm sorry," with no explanation. It was as if they had both disappeared. I sat in my apartment late one night, staring out the window at the lights across the bay. The quiet was suffocating. My phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence, and I glanced at the screen. It was from Knox. "You were right. I'm sorry." I stared at the message for a long time, the words spinning in my mind. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I set the phone down, stood up, and walked to the fridge. I opened it, pulling out a bottle of wine. The glass in my hand felt heavy as I poured, watching the dark liquid swirl in the glass. But it didn't make me feel any lighter. I could hear the echoes of the trial, the applause, the flashing lights, but it didn't make any of this feel real. I had exposed the truth. I had helped stop the lies. And yet, here I was, standing in the ruins of everything I had once thought mattered. I didn't want to think about my family anymore. I didn't want to think about Knox and Sloane. But it was impossible not to. The silence from them spoke volumes. They were still my family, but they had made it clear that they were no longer a part of my life. I thought about what I had lost, what I had sacrificed to expose the truth. And as the night wore on, I realized that the victory, the public vindication, was just a part of the process. The real cost was something I couldn't measure. As the sun came up the next morning, casting a soft glow across the bay, I sat there in the quiet, knowing that I had done the right thing. The fallout was brutal, and I had lost more than I had ever expected. But I had done it. I had exposed a predator. I had saved lives. And in that, there was a kind of peace. A peace that came with knowing that, sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones that change you forever. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. I didn't need my family to see it. The truth was bigger than any of us. And in the end, it was the only thing that mattered.